Today is the first time that I'm posting a video that's the same on YouTube as it is from my membership website, fromthefield.farm. And this video was filmed back in May, so it's been in the queue for a while, and it's something that I've done a lot more this year as I batch content. So I go out on the road, film a bunch of people, and then I stream it out over weeks in the season. And this is filmed at Hull Services in Calgary, Alberta. And the main reason I wanted to share this on both platforms was to basically just get the message out of what they're doing here at Hull Services. It's very inspiring. This is kind of more on the regenerative approach with the human element. And Baden Sommers is one of the directors here you're going to meet. And this program is all about helping at-risk youth, helping kids. And some of these kids come from really tough backgrounds. And they're doing some incredible work here to help kids feel more connected to one another, their communities, and help them, particularly, and what we're going to talk about in this video, is to plants and to the nurturing of growing things from seed all the way to a fully developed plant to harvest or whatnot. And what Baden Sommers has done here is he's developed a market garden as part of the program. So he's been involved with this program for a number of years, doing carpentry and automotive with kids, but now he's got this fully functioning market garden. They've got a passive solar greenhouse built, and since this video was filmed fairly early in the season, there's not really much going on for production, but that's not really what this video is about anyways. I wanted to talk to Baden about the program and how it's had an effect on kids. So that's mostly what we're talking about. This isn't a technical video like I would normally post at fromthefield.farm, where we're looking specifically at, machine implements, soil, crop information, stuff like that. This is more broad. We even get a little bit philosophical, but it's really inspiring what they're doing. And so since I've put this up on YouTube, I wanted to help get the word out of what they're doing. So there'll be links in the show notes to their program if you want to check them out. And another thing that I found very interesting about the program here is that it's totally privately funded. There's often a misconception out there where people think that in order to have programs like this, these things have to be funded by government. And this is not the case at all. This is funded by businesses in the community of Calgary and other, I don't know all the places that the funding comes from. I'm sure there might be some government funding in there somewhere, though I'm not sure. I could be wrong. But it's primarily funded by businesses in Calgary. And, I'm a fairly free market guy. I've talked a lot about, not a lot, but I've spoken to libertarian ideas in the past. And that's kind of where I am philosophically, politically. But I felt it kind of cool, felt it necessary to share that there are things like this happening that are outside of government funding. People can get together on their own free will and decide to fund and put money and put resources and time into programs that help the community. And that's exactly what's happening here at Hull Services. So I'll leave the rest to Baden to talk us through and take us through this program and what they're all about. Enjoy.
My name is Baden Sommers. I'm here at Hull Services in Calgary, Alberta. Woodbine, growing vegetables and working greenhouses and such.
Talk about, I guess I just want to know a little bit more about you. Like, how did you get it? Because you got into permaculture and all this stuff way later. How did you get into working with this? Were you a trades guy before?
No, I was an artist, like a woodworker, a wood butcher. So I have a degree in sociology, which played not much into my selection, but then I was working with wood, and then I was living in New Brunswick, which is my home province, and I took off from there and ended up in Calgary and came to work right at Hull. Like, it's the Maritimer's dream. Like, you show up in Alberta on Wednesday, do an interview on Thursday, and go to work on Friday. So that's what
And then
happened.
celebrate on the weekend.
Celebrate on the weekend. So that's what happened to me, and I've been here for 15 years. And then 6 or 7 years ago, I moved into the woodworking shop there, and that's one of my passions is woodworking. And gradually, I just wanted to, totally selfishly, I want to blur the lines between what I'm doing for work and what I really am passionate about. So I try to, as much as I can, to just blur that line until there's no discernible difference between what I'm doing my 8 hours at work or the other hours when I'm at home. And I've managed to somewhat achieve that, I think. So I do outdoor education and woodworking and automotives. I build cars and trucks and vans, and now I have a really recently passionate about, I've always been passionate about the environment, but permaculture and just working in this fashion really got me jazzed about it, about sustainability. And I think, like you, I'm kind of libertarian in mind, so I want to think about sustainability not for the larger good of this big system that we're part of, but for myself and my family and the people that I work with here. This is a community, and I would like us to be more independent, so we can cut off some of those other streams that are interfering with. And I want to be innovative too, and this seemed to be a way that we could achieve that. How
did you get into permaculture, and then how did you find Rob Avis? Because Rob, mutual friend of ours, had a significant there was some inspiration and perhaps some actual direction in how you did this. How did that all come about? Yeah, there was a guy I was working with here. His name was John Burley, and he introduced me to the concept of permaculture because I had at that time no idea. He was into outdoor education too and working with kids in the mountains and whatever, and he had a passion for permaculture, so that's where the conversation started. And then we kind of bounced the idea around about doing a design, and he had done Jeff Lawton's course, and he had done a course with Rob, and so he put together, it's one of our founding documents, this permaculture design plan for this site that we're on right now. Unfortunately, he left with a part of my heart with him, because I was really excited about doing some of this stuff with him. And but he left that residue, which was a document and this name Rob Avis, which was kind of floating in my head. So when the opportunity came up with Fluor, I said the word permaculture a bunch of times because I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it was a word. And then I said, let's start with a greenhouse. And that's what they kind of bid at, was the greenhouse concept that made sense to them. And they're an engineering company, so they were excited about passive solar and what could they do with the climate battery. And they were looking for engagement for their company to boost volunteer hours. And they sunk 2,000 plus hours into design and implementation, procurement of all the materials. They took care of it all. So they came up really huge for us and produced what we have here now. And they're still, they're coming back this year we have a big plan to move forward this year. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, that's kind of how I got on to permaculture design. And I still have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. The best practitioners, that's how it always is you learn enough to get started and figure out all the details.
I think that's the way it has to go, yeah.
Especially when you're working with kids too.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of human dynamics here.
Oh yeah, man.
That I imagine it's infinite.
Yeah. Yeah. The kids are complicated, and the staff are even more complicated, I think.
Since I'm such a free market guy, I love when I see private individuals coming together to make things like this happen.
Yeah, and things like this.
I'm sure you have some governments giving you money here and there, which is a part of any type of organization like this. But it is cool to know that there's people out there that actually just want to help, and they're willing to put skin in the game to do it.
Yeah, of course. And the industries that keep Calgary going have kept this organization going too. That's the reality of it. And not only do they, but my push now, a little bit aggressively towards them now, is you have an obligation to. If you're doing business in this community, you should be contributing to the community as much as you can, as much as you fiscally can and physically can. And the companies in Calgary have been really good. Of course, an exceptional company because they helped me do this is Fluor Canada that we deal with. And
Fluorine Canada?
Fluor.
Fluor.
They're an international engineering consortium, and they're based here. They have a big office here down in Sundance, just south of here. So we're literally in their back door, and they've been helping this organization for 25 years. And they're the guys that came through and said, when I kind of explained the vision of what I wanted to do, which at the time for me was total pie in the sky, I didn't even know what I was talking about. I just threw the word permaculture in there and said greenhouse, and they were like, a week later or so, they called me, yeah, we want to do it. Well, what do you mean want to do it? We want to do the thing, the greenhouse and the garden. And so that was 2014. We started talking about it. 2016, we started building the greenhouse.
That's pretty fast action for this type of organization.
We move quickly, and it's a smaller ship, and we're pretty independent. So, if you're talking about like a bigger organization, like we deal with CBE, for example, which is a wonderful partner of the school too. But everything moves a little bit slower to get things turned around, But Hall Services in particular they're willing and able to innovate. And I think that's where that's the position we have to put ourselves, especially in crisis. I mean, we're in a mental health crisis across the board.
Absolutely.
And kids are the first line they're taking the first line of damage. So, we don't have time to muck about anymore. Like, we have to innovate, and we have to meet the kids where they're at, and we have to be flexible and move faster than we ever had in the past. And programs like this allow us to do that a little quicker, because people say, okay, this is something that works. Let's fund this, because it's showing, there's not a bunch of, everyone wants evidence-based. Everything has to be evidence-based. So there's not a ton of evidence about this other than anecdotal evidence that I can supply, or other people that are doing programs like this. But the proof's there. I mean, you see engagement with the kids, and kids are showing up for school, and when they're here, they're engaged in what's happening, they're learning, and they're achieving results where they're at right away. So that makes a big difference.
Where are a lot of the kids? I guess I'm curious. What are the demographics, and like, what kind of homes are these kids coming from? How do they end up here?
Yeah, it varies. I mean, definitely it's across the board, but most of our kids, like the school was originally designed as an educational facility just for the kids who are on this campus. So if you drive around the ring road, maybe on the way out, you'll notice there's a bunch of little treatment facilities, and the demographics range from pre-adolescent treatment, so little guys, 5, 6 years old, all the way up to like a social justice program where kids are in lockdown. So it's the whole range, right? And within that range, all those kids at one time were coming here to the school, and we would exclusively educate those kids who were here on campus. And in I believe it was the late 70s, the CBE approached and said, hey, these kids exist elsewhere in the system, and they're in community schools, and they're struggling. So can we start a partnership with you and start sending some of those difficult kids who are having some difficulties into your system? So now the demographic is like 50-50. Like 50% of our kids come from here, and then 50% are bussed in from community.
So they're like, how far?
All over Calgary. Yeah.
Some
of them travel an hour and a half, 2 hours by bus. Which
Every day?
Yeah, each way.
Holy.
Which probably isn't the best way to start your day, but wow. But I think like if you can imagine in Alberta and in Calgary especially, of big class sizes, 30 kids. If you think a portion of every class, and teachers who are in the system will attest to this, a portion of every class has 5 or 6 or 7 kids who have some really complex needs, either mental health needs or learning disabilities or whatever. And in those environments, you have one teacher with 25, 30 kids. 5 of those kids are kids who have some sort of behavioral code or a mental health disorder, and you're trying to run a class with that many kids who are really struggling. Your attention goes to those kids because they require more attention, or they'll disrupt your class and you won't be able to get anything done. So a portion of that happens where they direct a lot of their energy towards those kids. And then you have the other achievers who maybe are achieving on a higher level who are neglected in the class because, the attention is on the kids who are struggling. So I think, my perception lately is that, and I spoke of innovation earlier, like we have to totally reform the way that we're doing things. I have no illusions that anything I'm doing is going to change the way the system works, but I'm definitely going to be the one to say, and it's no surprise to people, like our educational system is struggling. Kids are struggling in our system, which is why we're seeing more incidences of violence in schools and kids who are getting street entrenched, and even kids from, maybe more affluent communities that are struggling in their schools and dealing with a lot of mental health stuff, and we see it everywhere. So why not innovate and change,
Absolutely. Yeah. I imagine this is one of the field plots that we planted out. Looks like it's recently turned over grass.
Yeah, we just I was lucky to get a BCS this year. I know you're a big fan of the BCS. So we just rotary plowed this and
there you go, 739.
Yeah, tilled it up, and so a portion of this will be turned into like market style beds, like a 30-inch bed, and then we'll try to integrate like lots of different planting in there, like not all market style beds, but some different stuff.
Yep. What's the plan with the produce? What do you guys do with it?
Well, like ultimately I'd like to if you community supported agriculture would work perfectly on site, because we have a lot of kids that are here 24/7, 365 days a year that live on site. Oh. So we could be providing, based on the land that we have, we could be providing a big portion of our fruits and vegetables to the kids that are living here. So initially I'd like to supply the school with stuff that we can use in our cooking program. We have a really good breakfast club and a lunch club and cooking programs and stuff like that. So using stuff that we're producing here, funneling it into the school, and then eventually, as we can get our production numbers up, then moving that into a bigger program that's supplying like the treatment centers with fresh vegetables. And then, I see trucks roll in here every day bringing produce from California or wherever it's coming from. It's nonstop. So if we can kind of provide a little bit of a break for that initially, would be great. And ultimately I'd like to do it all,
Is there much resistance or regulatory pushback as far as I've done a lot of work with institutions too, and sometimes you have cafeterias that are locked into contracts for distributors.
Sure, yeah.
Have you had to deal with much of that?
Not yet at the school, because we're pretty small beans,
Yeah.
So we did run into a few things, like when Fleur was putting in the greenhouse, we were talking about putting in rainwater tanks and then using that water. We will do some top watering with rainwater tanks on perennial stuff, but you start to see just glimpses of that, like, okay, rainwater tanks, running irrigation into the greenhouse, yada yada. Whoa, hold on. What about the water? Is it safe to use? And those questions come up, and then you're like, well, we'll put filtration on it. Okay, well, what if the filtration fails? Then Fleur's on the hook, right? So there's always those questions that come up, because people are, of course, gun shy. They don't want to end up with a E. coli kid on their poster for your organization. Yeah, it's bad for business.
Yeah.
So this is our second year. I'm just going to shut the fans off.
Sure.
So yeah, we're kind of into our second year of production.
Oh, you got this is your earth tubes going on
Yeah,
here.
totally.
Wow,
Yeah.
right on.
So the kids were like, when we started building it, kids were like, it kind of looks like a robot. So we just kind of ran with that idea. And kids were pretty involved in like the build, because I do run like work experience programs, and then we have an outdoor education program that's really flourishing right now. So all those kids are funneling through this program. So our outdoor education program, we still do trips to the mountains and overnight camping trips and that kind of stuff, but a huge portion of the workload now is fallen on that program, and the kids are super invested because it's theirs, right? There's no there's no mucking about. They understand the significance of what we're doing, and they're interacting with the plants and the food, and they're taking care of. I mean, we germinate everything from seed too, which starts in February in the shops, and the kids get right into it, and then they have more, the onus is on them to succeed. So we let them take the reins and do as much as they physically can. Of course, we're there to kind of pick up the pieces when they fall somewhat. But, I tell people now that my primary yield in this program is a therapeutic one, and it has to stay that way for me for now. So luckily I don't have to worry about production numbers or getting a bunch of stuff out the door, or things going bad, or messing things up and having die off or whatever. Engagement is my number one. My feedback loop ends there. If the kids are engaged, then I'm winning, and so far that's been the case. So it's just kind of withholding my desire to push forward is the hardest thing, because I want to, you see what's possible, I think, right away, and then you want to push your agenda, like, oh, let's do this, and then we can do this, and I try to make it, to pull my own reins back and say, let's just take things slower and make sure that the kids are invested in the entire way, and we move at that pace, and that's the right pace for the program.
How has the effect been on some of the kids?
Yeah,
it's cool that you've identified that and you've kept that is a goal in your primary outcome.
Yeah.
How has that effect been on the kids?
Yeah, I think the effects on the kids kind of ranges, right? You have kids who are maybe a little bit initially apprehensive about interacting in this way with plants, and lots of the kids that we have they come from really tough backgrounds, or they might be street and trench kids or whatever, so they're always a little bit apprehensive about getting involved, because it is a kind of a soft skill. The first feelings are very nurturing, and there's this and we have to take care of it and all. So I think sometimes the kids especially the kids that we deal with, sometimes are a little bit like, oh, hold the phone here.
You're scared of that responsibility?
Yeah, and just the feel-good feelings, I don't want to have to care for something or worry about something or think too much about it, or I don't know. I get that feeling sometimes, that kids are maybe a little apprehensive that way. Don't want the responsibility, but passion drives the project.
Yep.
And you have more than one person here. Like, of course, I'm kind of spearheading the initiative, but I think there's other people here who are really passionate about it. So the kids see that and they just get caught up in that, and that works here either in the garden or I'm in the wood shop. I'm a passionate woodworker. I have an automotive program. I'm really excited about cars, and the kids just respond to that more than anything.
So have you guys had a season of growing vegetables yet?
So this is the first time
In this incarnation of this program to do this market garden.
Yeah, last year we ran the greenhouse. We didn't finish till late in the spring, the actual construction of the greenhouse. We were still putting the solar panels on and putting soil in, because it's tubbed out 6 feet, right? It has no floor.
Yep.
ICF walls.
Yep.
So when Floor kind of finished the construction phase, and we still had a little bit of time where we were kind of bells and whistling. So I think late spring before we got started in the greenhouse, and then the climate battery didn't really have a charge at that point, so it was cold in here still in February, March. It was still cold. But we started getting going, and I was looking at my Instagram feed the other day, we had a bunch of stuff in the ground on May 10th. And last year we did peppers, crazy amount of peppers in here, because the kids, for whatever reason last year, and it wasn't the same this year, but whatever reason last year, the kids went crazy for peppers. So this place was chock full of peppers. So that's what we had in the ground, and we did up these kind of little beds and kind of messed around with that idea. Mm-hmm. But I think as we get to, once you start working in these systems a little bit, because I'm totally not a gardener. I've had kitchen gardens at my house, but on the scale that I want to get to, I'm starting to understand the role that the greenhouse plays in development of that scale. And what can you use your greenhouse for? What's the square footage best for? And like I'm discovering now, it's like you got to fill the floor with germinations and cultivations, and then you got to move that out and then run hot stuff through the summer. It was so hot in here last year.
Yeah.
So we got some infrastructure improvements like exhaust fans, and we're going to do a supplementary heat source for next winter so we can see if we can get through 4 seasons next year. The climate battery performed really well this winter, and I have everything Bluetoothed. It's like all the intakes and exhaust and ambient temperatures inside and everything. So you kind of see soils all probed. So you kind of see where we were at coming into February. There's no ground freeze, obviously. Temperature stayed pretty even all through the winter. 2 or 3 degrees Celsius was our lowest temp at 6 feet.
Meanwhile, it's
8 to 10 foot frost this year in Calgary, right?
Yeah.
So that when things start coming online in March, it comes quick, boom, 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 and you can see, we could have been in even earlier this year with the support of the AGS.
Yeah.
And that's with no supplementary heat. So I think this year, if we put a small, electric heater or whatever, industrial scale, but small, just to keep things, the ambient temperature inside, 5 degrees Celsius or whatever, then we'll be able to boost right away in February. February killed us this year because, I don't know, in Calgary, we just got slammed here, like with really cold temperature for the entire month. I think it was one of the coldest Februaries in the last 25 or 30 years or something like that.
Jeez.
So we had and at that time, you're calling on your climate battery to do the most work with the least amount of charge, right? It's been pushing heat all winter, and then you're calling at the end of the season, the shoulder, for more heat, and it's just, your thermal mass is somewhat depleted, I think, at that point. But
So you have no other heat in this except the climate battery?
just the climate battery.
Wow. And so what was the ambient temperature in here when it was at that coldest point in February?
In February, it was cold. I mean, it didn't get
below freezing, but
it got below freezing.
Oh, it did.
Yeah. But we were like, it never gets as cold as outside, but we were in, minus 30 ambient temperature outside, plus cloudy, and everything's on solar panels in here. I don't have any other power running in here to run my climate battery. So we had no sun and minus 40 temps. So it just can't keep up.
no.
Right. So, I mean, it had no need to. I planted some fig trees. I want to do a lot of perennial plantings in here and have like a kind of mini food forest, because I want the kids to have a place to come.
Mm-hmm.
And you've seen that when we rolled up here. More and more the kids are being drawn to this place, or teachers are bringing kids out to this place, to have a difficult conversation. I think that's what happened over here. And we've seen kind of the end of it where there was a little spin-off at the end and maybe things didn't go so well, but that's the space I want to create, that people come to this space in order to engage therapeutically with the kids or relationally with the kids, or come out and do some work, get your hands dirty. And the greenhouse I want it to be the focal point, so that in February you can still come out here when it's 12 degrees outside and come in here and hang out and work with some plants. And you might not be producing hothouse tomatoes all winter, but at least the space is open. Put some hanging hammocks in here, hopefully have some perennial stuff that stays going, and create that space.
So it's neat to hear how it's having that effect on the kids. And you are somebody who's been working with kids for a while in these various different programs, like you mentioned, the working on cars, the automobile stuff, and the carpentry. I know it's only, it's not too long in, but what have you noted? What have you observed that's different about coming around the space of growing and plant life and food, opposed to meeting in the wood shop or meeting in the body shop?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I think it hits a different demographic of student, which I assumed, like, the kids, I mean, we're primarily, a huge portion of our population is male. It's just the way things are screened behaviorally.
Yeah.
They get the brunt of the behavioral issues.
Yep.
Not to say that females in
Don't
the
have
system.
them too,
but males
men
get
do. It's a fact.
Totally.
Yeah.
So that's kind of historically that's where I'm also male, so I've kind of geared my interventions towards that population just because it's primarily what I deal with. And traditionally, kids that come to automotives class or come to industrial arts, they're usually male kids. So I assume that those same kids would be attracted to this place just because it's, there's some backbreaking work and whatever, but there's a component of growing that made itself apparent really early, is the nurturing component of it, or that maybe sometimes others recoil from. Some of our clients are really drawn to that component, and it's something I was totally surprised by. So the seed, the germination, the caring for a 72 cell tray where the kids are carrying it around and they got their name on it and they know what's in there and they're keeping it in the light closet, they're coming to check on it. Like, I never dreamed that would be that way, and it ended up that way, right?
And are you seeing that those nurturing characteristics come out in the boys as well?
Yeah, no question. Yeah, and me too.
Yeah.
It softened me. I like to think I'm in touch with that side, but it definitely gave me some perspective on, and just the way I can approach kids in this environment is different than I approach them in the shop, or if you're in an overnight camp trip up in the backcountry or whatever. It's just a different. We call them milieus, like therapeutic milieus. So it's a place that you can kind of create a space, and then within that space, within that milieu, you kind of control the interactions in that milieu. So it creates opportunities to teach, right? So that's what you're doing, is creating a milieu that you're kind of controlling the parameters of what's happening there. And then within that milieu, you're prompting teachable moments, right? And I think as a counselor or someone who does this for a living, the easier that you can prompt those moments, or the more that you can manipulate those moments to kind of come forward, the more opportunities you have to teach, the more opportunities you have to form really strong relationships with kids. And that's the chalkstone, is a strong relationship. And it takes a while to get there. And sometimes you can abbreviate that time by providing a really rich milieu so that you can boom get to the brunt of the issue quicker, because you've created a place where you control that space. And that's part of the design here, is that we want to create a space where we control the milieu, we control the therapeutic space, and kids have a part in that, in developing it. We want them to be here and feeling like it's something that works for them too. But this morning was a prime example where you're just watching, and then at the end of class, these are my work experience guys, they're all awesome hard workers. At the end of class, you get to sit down and debrief what happened this morning, and it's like no incidents, no behavioral incidents, but hey, I heard this, I heard you guys talking about this. Like as I mentioned earlier, lots of our kids they're susceptible to being pulled in really negative ways, and like street and trench kids, gang members. Calgary doesn't have a huge crazy gang problem, but we definitely have that issue around, and the kids that we deal with here are susceptible to that. So you talked about it earlier too, is providing them with here's a different look of what you could do that's going to provide you with the same thing you're searching for. You're searching for relationships, you're searching for ownership of something, you're searching for being a part of something bigger than yourself, right? All those same things that drive people towards a life on the streets or whatever can drive them towards being a farmer or a gardener. It's the same thing. I mean, I've already in the last couple of years, I've got some deep relationships just out of this little program. And Rob's a great example of that. Like, he's someone I'm super close with. I would have never met him probably.
Yeah.
So, and it's important. It's important for them to see that there's other options. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't need a master's degree to do this. You can learn everything that you need to learn to take care of yourself. Imagine you could just move out of the city, to a small community in Alberta, and you can do something like this, and you can build a community around you, and you can have people that are all like-minded, working together, taking care of each other, you know, building relationship. All the things that we push around here can all be achieved within a milieu that looks like this. So just give them some options, some other stuff to look at.
It's really cool too, because in a way you have, in a sort of subversive way, you've created an environment that says subversively it's okay to be nurturing, it's okay to be in touch with something greater than yourself. I imagine that philosophy doesn't come out as much in the wood shop and the automotive shop.
Sure, yeah, you're right. You're exactly right. Yeah.
And it's really cool just listening to you. You know, everything you said really just demonstrates how this can bridge many personality flaws, mental disabilities, scarring of abuse. By creating that environment that people can connect with one another over something. That doesn't mean they have to have a conversation to confront everything that's bad about them. They can do something and create something and give life.
Yeah, totally.
That's really cool.
I think what's really, and I don't, you know, I don't want to just say that things like this happen spontaneously, because they don't. Like, you have to have, especially in these systems, you have to have some clinical support behind what you're doing in order to support the programming. Like, people won't just go willy-nilly off and support a program like this if there isn't there has to be some facts behind the work, right? And now we know, like, the way the brain develops, the interesting stuff that's, you know, come of age in the last decade or so is, like, the brain develops hierarchically, like from the brainstem up. So these type of activities help kids regulate, because it's activities that are, we call it the lizard brain, like kind of the lower part of your brain that are generally autonomous, like your heart rate, for example. These type of activities help regulate that system. So our kids operate in the lower part of their brain. Most teenagers have very limited access to their cortex, the front part of your decision-making brain. I've heard it called the wizard brain and the lizard brain. So the lizard brain is the bottom. So most teenagers, and ours are no exception, operate in that kind of area, and me too sometimes. But to access that wizard brain, then you need to regulate your way on up. You can't just, like, flip into your cortex and say, "Oh, I'm going to make a good decision now," when your BPMs are at 120 resting. You know, your body's in a fight or flight mode all the time. Like, our kids get off the bus in that state. So now neurologically we know that these type of activities have to be pursued therapeutically in order for these kids to reach some sort of baseline, and it has to be repetitive. It can't be, you know, a one little hit here and one little hit here, and they have to be immersed in that environment all the time. So every time they move around the school, every time they're interacting with a teacher or another classroom or another milieu, that has to be immersive to the point where it helps them regulate. And if they're dysregulated, everything shuts down and you're in crisis mode, and you're, like, you're doing emotional first aid basically to try to get them back to a point where, you know, their baseline is really high. They can flip into, like, a fight or flight or fear or, you know, anything. They can flip into that area really quickly. So our goal here, and it's supported by neuroscience now, is to get them in that lower part of their, into the brainstem, regulated in there, and then you can start accessing the higher parts of your brain all the way up to the cortex. So.
I imagine too, bringing in a level of routine with work like this is going to have a significant effect on their well-being, understanding that many of these kids are coming from very unstable, unpredictable, moving around type environments, coming into a scenario like this where there is this routine, there's a regularity, there's a schedule, and there's a very visible timeline from work put in to work coming out.
Yeah, totally.
That's got to be an incredibly rewarding thing for some of the kids coming from the backgrounds that they come from.
Yeah. And if you get them seasonally, with some of the kids that we have over the long term, you know, I've worked with kids that came to me in elementary school are now in grades 7, 8, and 9. And they've been kind of into this immersive programming throughout. And it's not to say that, you know, by the time they hit grade 8 or junior high that they're having these amazing catharsis and they're all well and good now. I mean, they still struggle, but they know they come back to this place where they get that predictability, and they may even see in a place like in the garden, they may see a seasonal predictive nature the predictive nature of nature. You know, it's, you know, we're into a season here where we're starting in February and we're ending at harvest. That's going to happen every year. So when they come back, they'll see that, oh, we're just back into the swing of things. You know, we got stuff to do. We're considered a year-round school, so we come back mid-August. So, you know, when they come back mid-August and, hey, we're ready to start harvesting or put in a winter crop or whatever, it'll help with that transition, get back into the flow of things. You know, hopefully they don't show up early and want to get back to work.
If people want to learn more about this program, perhaps get in touch with you to help, volunteer, donate, what's the best way for people to do that?
In order to get in touch, I'd encourage people to go to hullservices.ca and kind of look at we're just a small component of a bigger organization that's doing phenomenal work, not just here in Calgary, but we're recognized internationally as really pushing innovation in the type of work that we do. So I would encourage people to go to hullservices.ca. And if you want to follow the greenhouse, we have Hull Greenhouse, Hull_greenhouse is on Instagram. I promise I'm going to post more in the coming weeks here. So
excellent. Thanks, Baden.